all face in our industry every day. That's what's your best price. And clearly that's what we're here to talk about this morning. How do we handle that in today's world as compared to yesterday? And as an industry, we've really come up with some interesting responses over the last, I don't know, 10, 11 decades, I guess it's been. Those responses tend to fall into one of two categories, either statements that sound something like, come on inside, let's see if we can work out, let's see what the boss thinks, we wouldn't let a few $100 stand in the way of a deal, price is the easiest part of my job, we never lose a deal over price, yada, yada, yada. But all of these statements, I think you'll agree, are designed to convey that we are willing to discuss it, but not just now, right? I mean, all of these are thinly veiled efforts to avoid the subject. We can respond with questions of our own. That might sound like, is this the right car for you? What do you have in mind? What's it going to take? How are you planning to pay? Do you have a trade? Again, questions that seem relevant in a conversational way. So it doesn't sound like we're dodging the issue. It just sounds like we're taking it in another direction. And that's appropriate. It's worked for generations, right? There are many reasons that we've done this, reasons that we'll talk about as we go through this. But in today's world, with today's customer, we're going to argue, hopefully successfully, to you that this is not the most appropriate approach today or the most effective approach today. So to make that argument, I think you all agree that all of these responses fail to do one thing, and that's answer the question. And they also communicate one thing consistently. Whether I say to the customer, come on inside, let's see what we can work out, let's see what my boss thinks, what do you have in mind, what's going to take. All of these responses communicate to the customer that we're negotiable. And that's purposeful. That's not coincidental, right? We want the customer to hold on to the hope that we will negotiate with them long enough that we can build value, build rapport, do all those things that we've always been taught for salesmanship, right? And those things that were necessary before we could successfully engage the subject of price. So this is purposeful, and let me get this out of the way at the outset. I love the way the business used to be. I got in the business in 1985 personally, and this approach to sales worked very effectively for me and everyone that I knew, and given a choice, we wouldn't have asked for it to change because it worked great. Regrettably, in some respects, for those of us that are a little gray in the mane, the world has changed. It's changed dramatically, and there's a better approach today than trying to push price aside. And that's the objective today, is to make that argument successfully to you. So, minimum assumption, something we've got to kind of cover before we get too far into this, is that price equals visibility. I'll assume that the overwhelming majority of you, being VAuto customers, will agree with that new reality. The price equals visibility. The lower you price your product, due to AutoTrader, Cars.com, and their ilk, the lower you price your product, the more visibility you achieve, simply for the fact that customers shop cheapest to most expensive. Very few people go to the market wanting to see how much they can spend. They go to the market seeing how little they can get away with spending. And then they look at what that small amount buys them, and they increase it no more than they have to, which by definition means that the lower you price your product, the more visibility you achieve. So, consequences associated with that. The first, and not particularly attractive, the bad news, is that an unavoidable consequence of reduced pricing is reduced margins. There's no getting away from it. If you lower the price of your product or service, particularly if you're not able simultaneously to lower your costs, which we're not, right? Our costs haven't gone down. We're not paying less for cars today than we were 5 years ago. We're not paying less to our detailers today than we were 5 years ago. Lord knows we're not paying less for gas or service than we were 5 years ago. So our costs have continued to march on. But what we're arguing today is that you've got to price competitively in order to achieve visibility. And if that's true, then reduced pricing, by definition, means reduced margins. Not particularly good news, at least on the surface. The good news that we've discovered, and let me pause here just for a moment to tell you that each and every one of you has assigned to your store a performance manager. And any of those performance managers can share with you success stories relating to everything I'm going to share with you today. What I'm trying to convey is that there's nothing speculative about what we endeavor to share with you today. Everything that I'm going to share with you is proven to work, and not proven to work over the span of a few weeks or months, but over several 4 or 5 years now, and not with a few dozen dealers that were pilot dealers, but several hundred stores. So we bring this to you with great urgency and even more confidence. And just while we're on that aside, let me remind you that we at VAuto have no job security. We have no incentive to come to you and make the argument that we can deliver something unless we truly can, right? Because we have no contract. You can fire us this month if we don't perform effectively. So we bring it to you with great urgency because we know it will work, not because we hope that it will or it sounds good, right? So just wanted to share that with you at the outset. So the bad news of reduced pricing is reduced margins. The good news, which we've learned and discovered we couldn't predict this going in, was that reduced margins do not directly equate to reduced profits. That's simply a function of your sales process, which is what we're here to talk about. Reduced margins do not directly equate to reduced profits. In fact, what we've learned is that you can actually increase your front-end gross profits while lowering your prices. Now stop and think about that for just a second and think about the impact that would have on you personally as a salesperson, as a sales manager. What would that mean to your income if suddenly your store was able to simultaneously lower prices, thereby achieving more volume, more visibility, and higher front-end gross profits at the same time? And I'm not talking about collectively, like you'll sell more cars, therefore you'll make more money. While that's true, I'm talking on a car-by-car, deal-by-deal, front-end gross profit average basis. And again, we couldn't predict this. We're not quite that smart, but we've discovered it. We've observed it, and really important that we deliver that information to you. So how's that accomplished? Well, if you think about how we approach the industry traditionally, there is a pricing strategy and a sales process which must work hand in hand. And traditionally, what we did was we priced high, right, and negotiated from there. Today, what I'm telling you is we need to price competitively and not negotiate from there. So think about this for a moment. As an industry, if we had a $13,000 retail-ready car, in fact, let's imagine we have two of them, and they're identical vehicles in an identical market being offered right now together by competing dealers, and they're going to employ two different strategies. The dealer on the left side of the screen is going to employ the traditional approach, and on the right side of the screen, we're going to employ the recommended approach today. Well, on the left side of the screen, if we had a $13,000 retail-ready car, I think most of you will agree that we would offer that for 16 or 17 grand, 15.9, 16.9, whatever. We just simply throw that out there. And I want you to stop and realize that there's very little market sensitivity that went into that number. It's just what we own it for plus 3 or 4 grand. We just throw it out there without regard, historically, to how competitive that will make it in the market. Conversely, and we call that cost plus pricing. And what the entire industry did for generations, cost plus pricing. On the right side of the page, let's imagine that you're employing today's strategy. And what that means is market-based pricing. In other words, you look at the market, you see what comparable vehicles are being offered for in the market right now, and you make a competitive decision from the customer's perspective. Hey, look, if I were in the market for this car right now, and I were looking at it competing with these other vehicles that are very similarly equipped in the same market at the same time, where would we need to be priced in order to draw that customer's attention? Where would that car need to be priced for me as a consumer to respond aggressively? And that's the approach we recommend today. Well, the outcome of that would be very different, right? Let's imagine for the sake of discussion that on the left side of the page, we take that traditional approach, the cost plus approach, where it's 15.9, call it 16 grand in round numbers. We mark up 3 grand. On the right side of the page, let's imagine we concluded that we could get 14.8 for it, and that at 14.8 we believe it would represent a great value and is likely to sell quickly. So as a consequence, we have two very different margin opportunities. On the left side of the screen, we've got a $3,000 margin opportunity. On the right side, an $1,800 margin opportunity. Now, as an industry, historically, we've averaged something considerably less than $3,000 front-end gross profit. In fact, most folks agree with me when I tell them that the average for our industry over the span of time, front-end gross profit is $1,500, $1,400, $1,600, the middle team, right, as a front-end gross average as an industry. So if that's true, the question becomes, where did the other $1,500 go? If we start with $3,000 in margin, Did we drop $1,500 out of our pocket on the way to work? Of course not. Right? We surrendered that to negotiation, and we do it in a very logical manner. In other words, we set price aside at the outset. We build value. We establish that the vehicle's worth $16,000 in the consumer's mind, and then we say to them, "Hey, look, if I could get it to you for 15 grand, would you do it now? 15.2, 14.8, whatever the number is." And wherever they say yes is where we're going to do our deal. And as a consequence, historically, on average, we give up $1,500 and are left with $1,500. Whereas on the right side of the page, I would submit to you that no bartering is required to secure that commitment. That if we're already price competitive to the market, that the consumer's already concluded that we're price competitive to the market, that price is therefore one thing we should not have to negotiate. The price is already understood from the consumer's perspective to be competitive. So if that's true, then the cost of commitment historically is $1,500, whereas today it's $0. And as a consequence, and again, this is proven to be true, not speculative, our remaining profit historically after discounting is $1,500, and our dealers not discounting are winding up with a full complement of $1,800 on average. So you can start at 14.8 as compared to 16, which by definition will bring you more visibility, more volume, and you'll end up with a higher front-end gross profit. Now think about that for a second. If I offer something competitive in the market, how many people can buy it? If I have a car, this car that I'm talking about, and I offer it for 14.8, can I sell that to 4 people? No, only one can buy it. But what I've created is a situation where there's more demand than I can satisfy. And that's what we're looking to do. Whereas if I were priced at 16 grand, there would be insignificant demand, right? In fact, we may not crack the door on that car because it's simply not competitive for 3 or 4 weeks. And historically, we wouldn't think much of that. But in today's world, if I don't crack that door in 3 or 4 days, I know that my price isn't competitive enough. So that's the approach that we recommend today. Price competitive to the market. Do not discount that number once you meet the customer for reasons we're going to talk about going forward. So another premise that we need to share and just make sure everyone agrees and understands is that price is sales process dependent while sales process is price dependent. The two are interdependent. What that means is that if you have 2 products competing in the market for the same customer, and one is higher priced and the other is lower priced, they will not be offered the same way. So for a moment, imagine I'm selling whatever, vacuum cleaners, right? And I've got the highest priced product in the market. There's certainly one that is higher priced. And my approach to the customer is going to sound something like, yes, this customer, we cost a bit more, but for that difference, you get these features. And through these features, you'll enjoy these benefits. And I'm sure you'll agree, Mr. Customer, that these benefits are well worth the modest price difference we're asking you to pay, right? That's our approach. Whereas if we're offering a lower priced product, our approach is going to sound very different. It's going to say, well, sure, Mr. Customer, they have some features we don't have, but they're not core. They're not what you set out to get when you set out to buy a vacuum. You don't need that flash. It's just fluff. Now, if they were giving it away, sure, I'd take it too. Why not? But they're not giving it away. They're asking you to pay for it. In fact, they're asking you to pay a premium for it. And you certainly don't need to do that, right? So what that reveals is that your price position dictates how you sell your product. If you're priced high, you've got to sell one way. If you're priced low relative to your competition, you've got to sell another way. So in order for us to execute an aggressive pricing strategy, in order for you, our dealer, to be successful today, then this is a false choice, right? It suggests that you have a choice. And I'm here to tell you, you don't. You no longer have the option of not being priced competitively in the market because the customer is too educated and you simply will not hear from them. So you've got to execute an aggressive pricing strategy at a bare minimum, a competitive pricing strategy. And if you're to do that, then you've got to have a sales process that works effectively with that pricing strategy. The two have to go hand in hand. So while your pricing strategy determines your volume, the sales process preserves your front-end gross profitability. Over time, the strength or weakness, for that matter, of your sales process will dictate how competitive your pricing strategy can be. And now think about that for a moment, because I've just turned the page a little bit. In other words, there's 2 pieces of this puzzle, pricing strategy and sales process. Now, who controls the pricing strategy? That's your sales management, right? the used car manager, GSM, whoever prices the product. And salespeople traditionally have little, if any, influence over that, right? So why are we having this conversation with it's a two-piece deal? Well, we've got to have management pricing competitive, and they're only going to be confident doing that if they're the sales team that understands our position in the market and knows how to sell effectively. If I employ as a salesperson, if I employ yesterday's sales process, in other words, my manager put the product out there at a $1,600 front-end gross profit, and I if the customer, if I could rig you, at $1,000 or $1,200 off, I just put us in an untenable position. Right? We can't do that deal. I mean, we might do it once or twice on distressed inventory, take a $300 or $400 winner or loser for that matter. But we can't do it on a going forward, ongoing basis. It can't be our strategy. It's got to be the exception, not the rule. Right? So what we've got to do is have a sales process that does not rely upon discounting to close. We cannot discount to secure commitment. We've got to find other wins for the customer, other ways to satisfy their desire for a win other than discounting price. So to really get comfortable with this, the first thing you have to do is put yourself in the customer's shoes and examine what their process looked like today, because it's a very, very different process than what it was just 5, 6, 7 years ago. I mean, let alone 10, 15, 20 years ago. It's radically different than what it was. First thing we've got to recognize is, and all this is survey-based, right? Auto Trader, our parent company, does a tremendous amount of surveying to understand, what customers are doing, what they find useful, what the natural path to a purchase is, so that we can continuate ourselves as a company. And those surveys have told us some really interesting things. First, the average customer today spends more than 13 hours shopping online before they purchase. 13 hours collectively going through, sifting and sorting to find the vehicle that they find most compelling from a value standpoint. Now, it certainly doesn't take someone 13 hours, which brings me to my next meaningful piece of information. The average consumer today will pursue 4-point-something cars before they purchase. In other words, by pursue, what I mean is they will go through the process. They will determine what they consider to be the best value in the market. They will pick up the phone and be told it's not there. They will go into the dealership and discover it's not there. They'll go into the dealership and discover it doesn't meet their expectations. It's not nice like they hoped it was. It smells funny, drives funny, looks funny, whatever. They go into the store and can't get it up for the trade. They go into the store and the salesperson, insults their wife. Who knows, right? Insults his golf game. Something even more near and dear. So my point here is that the customer, whether they just made a simple phone call or they made a concerted effort to purchase, they will pursue more than 4 vehicles before purchasing. So if you think about it through that lens, then it's really only a 2 or 3 hour process, but one that they're engaging 4 or 5 or even 6 times. And if you think about it that way, it really makes a lot of sense, A, and it really puts in focus what the customer's experience looks like. In other words, by the time they purchase, on average, that customer will have been unsuccessful. The car will have already been sold more than 4 out of 5, or more than 4 times on average. So really important to understand what the customer's mindset is and what they've been through when you meet them. So to grasp that and what that process looks like and why it is that way, you've got to think about the information that customers need to make an informed decision. What information do customers need to recognize that this car is a better value than that car? Now, the information that they need has not changed over the years. What has changed is how they go about getting it. What I mean is, if I said to you, and I mean this literally, if you've not been in the market for the last 2 or 3 years for a used car yourself personally, then I would strongly recommend that you get in the market and do the things that you would do if you were in the market for a Camry or an F-150, whatever. Imagine you're in the market, go through the steps you would logically go through as a consumer today. And when I say that, I would argue that very few, if any of you, imagined getting behind the wheel of your car and driving around town. When I say to you, take time out of your day and shop for a used car, no one imagines driving around town, which is what we all imagined or would have done as recently as 10 or 12 years ago. All of us, without exception. We got behind the wheel of our trade and started driving down dealer row to look for a great value. But today, the shopping is not done by driving around. The shopping is done online. And that really sets up a very interesting comparison. But when customers are driving by, they've got to know the year, make, model, and trim. But driving by at 40 miles an hour, I can't tell an 08 from an 09 or a 10 from an 11. I've got to stop and ask somebody, hey, what is that? That's Suburban over there. What year is it? Right? What model? What trim? Whereas online, that information is made available to me. I can filter because I'm looking at the year I'm interested in. I'm looking at the model or trim that I'm interested in. I need to know the difference of equipment. In order to make a value determination, this one against that one. Does it have rear end? Does it have DVD? Does it have nav? I can't know that driving by at 40 miles an hour. Whereas I know that one. In fact, I can go from my search by keyword to limit it to only vehicles that have that equipment. Obviously, I need to know the price, and obviously, I can't driving by at 40 miles an hour. Traditionally, I have to stop and engage a salesperson and go through the negotiation process. Today, prices are made available online, and the best foot is put forward by every dealer because they're all competing for that customer's attention, for that customer's interest. They've got to get that first. And obviously, I can filter by that as I can the mileage. The mileage I can't know driving by, I know it online. Even the vehicle history. It's something as simple as, what's the story with this vehicle? Well, thanks to Carfax and AutoCheck, all that information is made available online through AutoCheck, Carfax, and the description you author. Right? One owner, bought here, service here, whatever. So if you step back and look at this, what you discover first is that virtually all of the information that a customer needs to make an informed decision to determine which represents greater value, A or B, all of that information is made available online. As compared to historically, I used to have to stop and ask somebody driving around. And that was just a very inefficient approach. So the market today is far more efficient. Now think about this just for a second while we're here. Not only is the customer more informed, but they're more committed. If you think about that again, the average customer driving by at 40 miles an hour, something catches his eye, he turns his head and goes, oh, that looks nice, let's pull in here. How much does he know about that vehicle? Nearly nothing, other than it looks good. And how much commitment does he have to that vehicle? 8 seconds worth. The amount of time it took him to make the decision to stop and start asking questions. He has no commitment and even less understanding of what that vehicle truly is. Whereas the consumer today has 12, 13 hours invested on average. They know everything there is to know, and they know it relative to the other products in the market. And they've made a value-based determination before they've ever introduced themselves to you. In fact, they decide who to introduce themselves to based upon who offers the best value. Think about that for a second. If it's Black Friday, right, you don't get up at 3 o'clock in the morning after your Thanksgiving meal and leave the company that's visiting you in your house and go down to Costco to buy a flat screen TV. But you did your research and you discovered the best value to be found at Best Buy or at Walmart. Right? If the best value is to be found at Walmart, I'm not getting in line at 4 o'clock in the morning at Best Buy. It just makes no sense to do that. People exclusively pursue what they perceive to be the best value in the market. And every customer you talk to today has made that informed decision, and they've selected you as the best value in the market. It's really important that we wrap our heads around that and understand how different that is than it was just a few years ago. Now, interestingly enough, and to prove that there is a God and he has a sense of humor, there is one piece of meaningful information we used to know driving by at 40 miles an hour, but today, sitting and doing our research in our living room or at our desk at work, we can't know. One meaningful piece of information that we knew driving by that we don't know virtually, and that is it available? Because by definition, if I'm driving by and I see it, it's still there. Whereas if I see it online, I simply can't know if it's still there. So that's truly the only unanswered question, and that's the question customers have when they contact you initially. So, what is the effect of all this transparency on the sales process, right? Given that the process has changed so dramatically and the consumers are so much better informed, well, let's examine that. The world that the traditional sales process, first we have to understand that From the time Henry Ford rolled the first vehicle off his assembly line to just a few, 5, 6, 7 years ago, the world in which we sold cars hadn't changed in any significant way. And if you don't believe that, go back 10, 12 years, whatever. In the year 2000, not much had changed in our business from the time Henry Ford, from a sales process standpoint, because the world hadn't changed. What I mean by that is, we as the seller controlled the information that the customer needed to make an informed decision. They had to come to us. In other words, buyer and seller engagement was necessary for the customer to gather the information that they needed to make an informed decision. And that inserted me and my persuasive nature into their shopping process. Right? I was inserted early in their process and was able to influence their decision. As a consequence, I learned never to give information away for free. Everything was done on an if basis. If that, somebody says to you, is that a 6-cylinder or an 8-cylinder? The appropriate answer is never 6 or 8. It's what are you looking for? That's what we've all been taught. You don't close doors. It's what are you looking for? I need to discover what your wants and needs are so that I can satisfy them. And if your wants and needs lean toward a 6-cylinder, I tell you this is an 8, I've just lost them. So I ask what you're looking for so I can direct you to the 6-cylinders that you might consider in our inventory. Right? So I never gave information away for free. In fact, I most often answered questions with questions. As a consequence, the process that we were all taught, that I was taught and that I taught many, many other people, works something like this. I'm going to go through 6 or 7 high-level bullet points, and I would be willing to bet that whether you've been in the business 12 months, 12 years, or 30 years, you were taught to sell this way. Right? The first step in the process was the meet and greet. After that step, next thing, a substantive thing, not build a rapport, because that's going on throughout, not closing, because that's going on throughout. But the next tangible step that we need to take is qualifying the customer's wants and needs. I've got to come to an understanding what they're looking for so that I can then help them select a vehicle. And once I've landed them on a vehicle, what's the next step? Well, obviously, product presentation and demonstration. I've got to make sure that A, my understanding of their wants and needs, that I've truly landed them on something that serves those wants and needs, and that they happen to like it. On paper, a Camry might serve their wants and needs. Yep, it's front-wheel drive, it's reliable, it's fuel efficient, it's safe. Well, that may be true of Camrys in general, but this specific one may not be a nice one. Right? So I've got to demonstrate the vehicle to prove A, it does satisfy their wants and needs, and B, that they like it. And if they do, then I'm ready to move forward, right? Because customers have 2 primal fears when they're shopping for a used car. Primal fear number 1 is they don't want a bad car. Primal fear number 2 is they don't want a bad deal. And the first thing I've got to establish is that this is a good car. What do I mean by that? It serves their wants and needs, and this happens to be a good one, right? Well maintained, no damage, whatever. So how do I find out if we're ready to transition from the car to the deal? Because if they don't like the car, I can't move forward to the deal. It doesn't matter if they don't like the car. So what we're all taught is on the test drive to ask trial closing questions to confirm that this vehicle suits their wants and needs, and that if the price were right, they'd buy it right now, right? So that's what trial closing questions typically sounded like. Something along the lines of, Mr. Customer, if you're comfortable with the numbers, would you buy and take delivery of this vehicle right now? If we can get you comfortable, right? If we can get to see it for a price or a monthly payment that you'd be satisfied with, will you buy and take delivery right now? Right, so we were always introducing negotiation to get to commitment. And we did that to find out, are you prepared to move from the car to the deal? So that's the issue with trial closing questions. It was once upon a time extraordinarily effective and necessary. Today it is neither, because it reveals that we were discount dependent as an industry, not our customer. We were. We introduced it in our very sales process. If we got the answer we wanted, then we would desk the deal, identify and overcome objections, and close. And that's the sales process nearly everyone in the business still today is being taught. Well, the problem with that is the world has changed. In today's internet-driven world, the fundamentals are very different. The moment the vehicle is posted online, the sales process begins. The customer begins sifting and sorting to find the best value. The customer remains anonymous until and unless we offer value. Now think about that for a second, because that's really, really important. You only hear from the guy that sees your offering as the best value in the market. Not a good one, the very best. because that's what customers do. They pursue the best, and when the best is proven to be something other than that, it's not nice, it didn't meet my expectations, or, I don't like it, whatever. Well, then I move to the next best, and that becomes the new number one. But so I'm always, constantly, whether I pursue one car or 12 in succession, each time I call on one of those 12 cars, I'm calling on what I perceive to be the new next best value, like the new number one. Because the 1, 2, 7, or 11 that preceded it, I've eliminated for some reason. Because had I not eliminated them, I would have bought them and you'd have never heard from me. So what this reveals is that, first, we can never sell the cheapest car in the market. We can never, ever, literally, say to a customer, we have the cheapest car in the market. Why? Because you don't know what value customers place on all the other attributes. If they place no value on proximity, if they place no value on condition, think about it. Then the guy can buy a car just like yours. Oh, yeah, it's got frame damage, and it's in Denver, it's 800 miles away. But if those things don't matter to him, you're never going to have the cheapest car. Because there's always something cheaper out there. You can never, unless you're in the salvage business and you have a lot in every town across the country, you can never say to a customer, we have the cheapest car in the market and be factually correct. Because you don't know how they define a car and you don't know how they define a market. Conversely, what you can say every time to a customer with complete confidence, knowing that you're never ever wrong, is that we offer the best value in the market. Because by definition, the customer agrees with you, or he wouldn't be talking to you. And they may not openly agree. They may play their cards close to the vest, but you need to have that confidence of knowing this is the process they've gone through. It's a very deliberate 12-hour process that brought them to the conclusion that I have the best value in the market. We've got to grab that reality and embrace it as our own. We've got to know that and operate from that confidence and conviction position. So the steps to the sale remain the same, but they occur in a very different order. What I mean is the psychology of the sale hasn't changed. People still need a win, and we're going to give it to them. But the steps to the sale are very different now because of this new reality, right? What happens first now is the customer qualifies their wants and needs, but you and I aren't involved in that process. There's no reason for the customer to concern himself with educating me as to their wants and needs. Why? Because I'm no longer necessary for the selection process. Every vehicle that I have and all of its attributes are made available online, as are all of the inventory for all of my competitors and all of those attributes. So the customer doesn't need to waste his time teaching me what he wants and what his needs are, because I'm not going to help him land on a vehicle. He does that before I ever meet him. The customer researches the available options, the available vehicles, and lands themselves, again, absent our input. Now, once the customer has landed, that's where we get involved. That's where the meet and greet occurs. Why? Because we literally hold the keys to the car that they perceive to be the best value in the market, at least for the moment, until they come down. If the car doesn't meet their expectations, then maybe that changes, and they move on to the new number one. They scratch mine off the list and move on to the next. But they've got to come to see me, contact me, to see the vehicle. So that's where the meet and greet occurs. And I'm convinced that if we put the keys in the cars, and I'm not suggesting you do this, but just think about it for a second. In today's world, if we left the keys in all our cars, you would meet fewer still customers, because some customers would come to your lot, they test drive the vehicle for themselves, they put it back in the spot and walk away, and you'd never hear from them because they didn't like it. But you'd hear from the people that loved the car, right? The people for whom it met their expectations, they'd come walking into the showroom and say, hey, I'm interested in this car out here. So what that reveals is you would deal with fewer customers, but a higher quality prospect. And that's the new reality. We only deal with people who have a genuine interest in what we have to offer. Through no sense of their own, customers used to waste a lot of their time and our time talking to us about things they weren't interested in, because they couldn't know it until they engaged us. Today, nobody does that. Every customer you engage, or that engages you more accurately, has a genuine interest, they're informed, and they're motivated to talk to you about the offering you have. So you only hear from people who are genuinely interested. As a consequence, one more statistic that's really powerful and really important to understand is that in 2009, just as recently as 5 years ago, the number of showrooms the average consumer would visit was somewhere between 4 and 5. The number of showrooms they would visit before they purchased was somewhere between 4 and 5, just 5 years ago. Today, that number is slightly over 1, like 1.2 or 1.3, the latest surveys tell us. What that reveals is it's an extraordinarily, radically different and extraordinarily efficient market today, where it used to be very inefficient. The appropriate customers are lining up with the appropriate cars, and they're talking to the salesperson who represents that product, and only that guy. They're not talking to 3 or 4 people before they get there. So the meet and greet occurs once they've landed themselves, and they introduce themselves to the guy that has the one they perceive to be the best value. They're going to quickly want to demo the vehicle because they want to see if the 3-dimensional reality meets with their 2-dimensional expectations. And if it does, they then want to move to the price and the deal and close. So what does this reveal? That we get involved far later in the customer shopping process than what we used to. That we're not integral to their process. And that what we introduce as value is introduced in a passive way. That we're not there to actively represent it or to influence the customer's perception. However, the people we hear from are highly motivated because they've come to their own conclusions. Right? They don't feel like they've been sold. They sold themselves. So it's a very, very different customer today. So if this is true, if the process for shopping has changed dramatically, then the sales process ought to change and align with it. Such that if today's shopping process, and if I've done my job well, you'll agree, that the average customer today will go online in overwhelming numbers. And that they go online and search great value. Once they find what they consider to be great value, they contact the dealer to confirm its availability. That's the only unanswered question. Now, given enough time, they'll ask other questions. That's a whole other discussion. But question number 1 is the car still there? Because if it isn't, none of the other questions matter. Once they understand that the car is available, they visit the dealer to confirm their expectations. That's all they're interested in. Does the 3-dimensional reality meet with my 2-dimensional expectations? And if they do, if their expectations are met, then they'll want to move to negotiating the variable. And principal and primary among those variables is price. Right? That's the thing that a customer will attack first and foremost because, well, for many reasons. 1, we've taught them to. 2, there's seemingly no downside. Right? What does it hurt them to ask? Can I get a discount? Right? But that's not the only variable in the deal. And this is what we've got to grasp. There are several other variables in nearly every used car deal, or at least one of the following. Right? Those variables being the value of their trade, the terms of their financing, the value of the warranty, right, on a used car, how much warranty is left, how much can I buy, what does it cost, right? So what this reveals is that there are multiple variables on every used car deal. And price is just primary among them. Now, why am I treating price differently? What is different about price than the value of the trade, the financing, the warranty? What I would submit to you is different is the price is known before they ever walk through your door. It was one of the things, there's no chance a customer comes to you and expresses interest in a car that they don't know what you're asking for it. None. Just like they know the mileage, the history, and everything else that's made available online. Now, can they know the value of the trade before they come in? They may have a general idea. They may have looked at KBB. They may have talked to another dealer. They may have asked their brother-in-law who works at a credit union. They could have had the car appraised by you a month ago, or for that matter, last week. But the fact is, they don't know what you'll give them for that car right now until you look at it right now. Because, even if they had it appraised there last week, they could have wrapped it around a telephone pole since then, right? Or they could have taken the mileage up to over 36,000, now it's out of warranty or whatever. Right? So they don't know what we're going to give them for that trade until we do the deal. And I think intuitively they get that. They also don't know what the finance is going to cost them. They may have talked to their credit union or their bank, but they don't know what you're going to give them until they sit in your F&I office. Same with the warranty. They don't know what it's going to cost them until you make them an offer. And you don't do any of that online with them. The only one of these variables that is nailed down absolute is the price of the vehicle. And for that reason, that's the one we're not going to negotiate. We're going to negotiate everything else. We're going to roll up our sleeves and get old school and use all of those old school skills as it relates to trade, financing, and warranty, but never as it relates to price, for 2 fundamental reasons. Number 1, if you have 4 variables to deal with, and I only have 3, I'm going to make more deals than you. Without question. Again, this is one of those things that we've proven to be true. Every dealership that we've asked to do this has given us the same result. And what I'm going to submit to you is, whether you're a sales manager or salesperson, there's something you can do today, very simple, to simultaneously improve your gross profit and your closing percentage. Something very simple. If you keep a delivery log, add 2 columns to it, and put in those columns 2 pieces of information that historically meant nothing to us. Right? Because when we keep a delivery log, we're keeping, delivery date, stock number, customer information, vehicle information, and how much did we make, front end, F&I, whatever total, and then a cumulative total for the time period, month or whatever. Right? What we weren't interested in was the sale price, because that only equated to a profit. Right? And the profit was all we were interested in. But today, add 2 columns. And in those columns, but the sale price, what did you sell the car for? What was the taxable sales price? And what was the price it was advertised for on the date of sale? Those are the 2 pieces of information. And if you'll do that, then Excel or any other database can calculate for you, any other spreadsheet can calculate for you the percentage of deals that involve a discount. How often is there a difference between the sales price and the price advertised on the date of sale? And it'll calculate for you how often there's a difference and what that average difference is. And without exception, everyone who does that discovers, quite predictably, that the incidence of discounting, the frequency with which you discount, and therefore the average amount of discount per deal goes down. And that's predictable, because Management 101 tells us if you want to improve anything, you have to track it. It just drives awareness. Right? So if you will start tracking on a deal-by-deal basis those 2 pieces of information, I can guarantee you will start discounting less often and for less dollars, which means your grosses will go up. Now, what we couldn't predict, but it's proven equally true, is that while that's going on, closing percentages go up. And that's completely counterintuitive. But if you stop and think about it for a few minutes, you'll discover it's true. More importantly, if you do it, you'll discover it to be true. So what we've learned is, if you track sales price and advertised price on the date of sale, discounting will go down as a percentage, grosses will therefore go up, closing percentages will go up along with it. And that's just simply a function of dealing with 1 fewer variable. If you choose to deal with 4 variables and I choose to deal with 3, I make more deals. Just think about it. When you're looking to close a deal, you're not creating variables. You don't say to a customer right before he signs up, hey, look, before you put pen to paper, have you really considered every option in the market? You don't do that. But we do just the opposite. We try to get them to eliminate other options. This is the only one for you. By definition, closing is the ability to close means eliminating variables. If you deal with 4, you're going to make fewer deals than I will as a percentage. The next reason that we want to get away from price and to raise to the other variables in order to negotiate is they're less costly. If I choose to negotiate the price of my product, by definition, I'm opening Pandora's box, and I'm left with a $2,000 or $3,000 expectation. Everything we have around today believes they saved a couple of grand on the car, or they wouldn't be driving it. Some salesperson somewhere crafted the perception it was worth more than they bought it for. And that delta is typically a couple of $1,000. So if I'm at $1,500, I can't do that. So I don't want to entertain that discussion simply because I can't meet their expectation, even if I would entertain it. Right? Whereas if I'm negotiating the trade, I'm usually negotiating hundreds, not thousands. So by definition, it's 1 fewer variable and it's a less costly variable. And if I can move them to financing or warranty, I'm negotiating error. I'm negotiating the perception of savings, not hard dollars. So what that reveals is, if you can move from negotiating price to negotiating any other variable in the deal to give them the win against the trade, against the financing, against the warranty, if you can get them to agree that the price is already a victory and something they can mark as done. Now let me show you another win, Mr. Customer. Let's move to the next variable in the deal. Let's get you a win there too. I've yet to meet a customer who would say no to that. And when they do, you just move them closer to the deal, past not only a variable, but the most expensive variable. So, and they want to close, right? So that's the customer shopping process. That's what they want to do. If that's true, and our sales process ought to map effectively to that, such that if the customer's going online and search for great value, I need to price to achieve maximum visibility. And you can ask, why does that matter? It matters because I want 4 people interested in every car that I have to sell. Right now, I can only sell it to one. We all understand that. But what it does is it drives urgency. From a customer's perspective, anytime demand exceeds supply, I, as a seller, am in an enviable position. And I want to create that reality in my showroom, where I've got more people expressing an interest, an active interest. I want more people pursuing my inventory than I could possibly satisfy with, which means I want more than one person interested at all times, but pursuing my inventory. In order to achieve that, I've got to be priced competitively. And if I can do that, there's one other really important change in the market. And I'll take a moment here to share that. We are all accustomed to being in a local business, and the number of available customers being our limiting factor. In other words, the used car business, traditionally, the only way anybody would come to understand that I had a sticker car was they read the local paper, they heard the local radio or cable advertising, they got a direct mail piece, but we weren't sending those 300 miles away. And those forms of advertising, where they drove by, and those forms of advertising are by definition local. Today, if I offer something competitively, customers in Bangladesh can see it. And increasingly, we're all discovering the customers will crisscross the country to save a few hundred or certainly a few $1,000s. And that new reality reveals that there's no limit to the number of customers available to me. None. What limits me are the cars that I have to sell. I can only sell the number of cars that I have, right? And I've got to turn them quickly so I can sell more still. But I'm limited not by available customers, I'm limited by available cars. And that's a really important distinction. What that means is I never walk a deal. I might walk a customer, and I realize that's sacrilege. But if I price a car competitively in the market, and I know that it represents value, I know that why? Because people are responding favorably. I've got 3 appointments this afternoon, or 1 this weekend and 1 today, whatever. But if the market responds favorably, I know that I'm competitive in the market. And I've got more demand than I can possibly satisfy. Therefore, if a guy walks in and says, yeah, I'd buy it, but I wouldn't pay you $14,800, I'd pay you $13,800. I have no problem saying to him, this customer, I appreciate your offer, but clearly we don't see this car through the same lens. We've done our market research. I expect you have as well. And that number is a compelling value in this market. Now, that's not to say I won't offer you a great value. That's not to say I won't offer you a great deal, because of course I will. We appreciate the opportunity to earn your business, and let me do that. Can I get the keys to your trade, please? Every customer I've ever met would say, yep, here you go. Why? Because I've just implied that I'll give them a great deal on their trade. I've moved them past negotiating price to the next less costly variable, and I've eliminated price as a variable. I've reaffirmed it. I've validated it. So I've got a price to be visible. I've got to drive more demand than I can possibly satisfy. I want to create that confidence in my sales force and in my showroom. I want guys walking around like they're 10 feet tall, bulletproof, because every customer you talk to sees in what you have to offer great value. Then if they're going to contact the dealer to confirm availability, it becomes my job not to lose the appointment. And that's a not too subtle shift from what it used to be. In other words, we were all taught that when the phone rings, you got to get the guy in, right? But the objective of any sales call is to get them in, because we can't sell them a car over the phone, right? That's what we were all taught. And that is born out of the old reality. In the old reality, the customer called with questions. Hey, can you tell me about, I was driving by, I saw that Suburban, and I need more information. And if they didn't have the information, it meant that the answers I was about to give may not suit them. The car may be older than they're interested in. It may have more miles than they're interested in. They may not have the equipment they're interested in. And they called to find out that information, which by definition meant some of them wouldn't be satisfied. So as a salesperson, I had to convince them they were wrong, that they should consider this, or convince them I had something else for them to consider in order to get them to come in. In other words, the appointment was not a foregone conclusion, even if the vehicle was there. Today, if the vehicle is there, the appointment is a given. customer is compelled, based on their process, to come look at the car. So I don't need to ask for an appointment. I don't need to seek it. I need to have the confidence of knowing that if the car is here, they must come in. So that changes how we handle sales calls, and that's a whole other discussion. But what I would submit to you is if you're on the phone much past, yes, it's here, then all you're doing is running the risk of losing the appointment. Because once they understand it to be there, they must come in. Anything said past that point runs the risk of losing the appointment. Really important distinction. So, if the customer is then going to visit the dealer to confirm their expectations, and they want to, and when they do, when they come in, I'm taught to run from price. Well, the difference today is I want to race to price. I want to bring price into the conversation early and often and with great confidence. The reason for that is pretty obvious once you think about it. If I wait for a customer to ask me or challenge me on my price, what kind of posture does he put me in? If I wait for the customer to say, hey, the car's nice, what can you do for me? He's just put me in a defensive posture. He's just asserted, and I've allowed him to assert or to suggest that the price of my vehicle is less than valid. Otherwise, why would he be questioning it? Why would I afford the customer that opportunity when I know for a fact the price is perfectly competitive or he wouldn't be talking to me? So what that reveals is that he who brings price into the conversation seizes a very crucial opportunity, and that opportunity is to define the price. If I wait for the customer to bring price up, they put me on the defensive, and they're able to assert that the price is less than valid. Conversely, if I bring price into the conversation, I'm demonstrating great confidence. If I run from price, what am I subtly telling the customer, and at times not too subtly? I'm telling them I don't have confidence in it. I don't want to talk about that. If anything that we perceive to be a competitive advantage, we're eager to talk about. And we need to see price in that way so that the customer will. Right? So think about this for a second. If you've got just the right car, it's the color everybody wants on this particular year make model. It's got all the key equipment everybody wants. It happens to be a one owner. It happens to have been bought here, serviced here regularly. I mean, it's absolutely exactly the right product. Aren't you eager as a salesperson to talk about all those realities, to talk about all those attributes? Of course you are. Those are selling advantages that you have. So we've got to see price in the very same light. If we set price aside and don't deal with it, what we're telling the customer is, I'm confident about its color, I'm confident about its equipment, but that price, yeah, not so much. Conversely, if I bring price up as with the same earnest approach that I do the color, the equipment, the history, then I'm telling the customer, I perceive this as a competitive advantage, and you should too. So I want to seize that opportunity. Therefore, I want to bring price into the conversation on my terms, and I want to do that early. And it becomes a race, right? It becomes a race. I want to get it on the table before the customer is given the opportunity. So, the next thing that I want to do, and this is a binary choice, right? Once price is up for discussion, we've got to make a choice, whether to negotiate it or validate it. And a lot of folks think that that's the customer's choice, but the customer makes that decision, and I'm here to tell you that that's not the case. The salesperson makes the decision whether we're going to negotiate or validate price. And the salesperson, most importantly, makes that decision long before they ever meet the customer. What I mean by that is, if you're put in front of a customer today with a product at a very competitive price, and the customer challenges that price, the only skills you've been given are skills to negotiate. Your response is very cautious, and it sounds something like, well, what do you have in mind? What's it going to take? Immediately, we're undermining the value. We're undermining the reality that price is valid. So I've got to make a conscious decision to validate price, not to negotiate it. Because once I agree to negotiate, I've undermined, I've lost the opportunity to validate. And if I choose to validate, I demonstrate that I'm not going to negotiate. So it's a binary choice, and it's a choice the salesperson has to make. It's a choice the salesperson has to make now on this call before you're ever standing in front of a customer. Because the only tools you've been given to date are tools to negotiate. We've got to give you the tools to validate, which is where we'll go next. So we'll then want to close, right? So the sales process is validate the price and then close. And start talking about what you should say, right? Giving you the tools that are necessary to be successful validating. Well, we're not just talking about the script. So what you say is critically important, of course, but what isn't as obvious, but it's equally important in my opinion and in my experience, is when you say it and how you say it, right? By that, if you've ever had the experience of selling past the close, you've employed poor timing, right? There's a right time and a wrong time to say things, even if they make your case. There's a right time and a wrong time to say it. So it's not only what you say, it's when you say it, and perhaps most important of all, how you say it, the conviction with which you say it, the tone that you employ, are all critical to conveying, to communicating a message. So, at this time, I just want to step back and talk about objection handling generally, right? Because we've discovered as we go through this, one stumbling block is everybody's perceptions in our industry, our own perceptions of objection handling. And what I mean by that is, if I could take you back to the early 90s, there were guys going around the country introducing and training dealerships and dealer personnel on objection handling. And the approach they employed, the acronym, was AIM. And it stood for Avoid, Ignore, Move On. And at first glance, that sounds comical, right? But it actually made a lot of sense. Once you got past laughing about it, it actually made a tremendous amount of sense. Why? Because customers weren't educated. And they would be thinking out loud. And they would say things, they would blurt things out that sounded like objections. But if you just were quiet for a moment and didn't respond, you could actually very often hear them answer themselves. Oh, yeah, that's not important. Or, oh, yeah, of course. Just give them a little bit of room, and they'd answer half the objections themselves. Because they weren't objections at all. They were just thoughts offered out loud. Right? So avoid, ignore, move on actually made sense on some level. Today, it makes no sense because the customers have all the information. They're completely informed. They're not blurting out questions that aren't relevant. Right? So in today's world, what we recommend you do is that every time you face an objection, you first got to acknowledge it. And the most effective way that we've learned is to simply say to the customer, Mr. Customer, if I understood you correctly, your concern is this. And then you say exactly what you believe you heard. The same verbiage, the same tone, to the best of your ability. And in so doing, the customer is going to do one of two things. They're going to say, yep, totally, that's exactly it. Or no, that's not what I meant at all. Yeah, that's what I said, but I can see where you got confused. What I meant was this. Right? We want to acknowledge the objection for two reasons. The first and lesser important of them is just interpersonal, right? I want them to know that I'm listening and I'm concerned with what they're saying. Right? And that's just basic, manners. Past that, selfishly, in a very meaningful way, I want to make sure I'm answering the right objection. Because if I operate on the assumption, if I operate without acknowledging and validating what that objection is, then I run the risk of answering the wrong objection. And three bad things happen when I do that. One, I waste the customer's time. Right? Two, I've introduced an objection that they didn't have. And that objection is perhaps even more credible, has more weight than the one that they were voicing. Because it came from me. It's a Freudian slip. It's the things I'd be worried about if I were them, given what I know about this car. Right? So I never want to make that mistake. I never want to introduce another objection based upon what I thought I understood the customer to be saying. Because it wastes their time. It introduces perhaps an even more credible objection, certainly one they hadn't thought of. And three, I've still got the original objection out there to deal with. So only bad things happen unless I acknowledge the objection. And the most effective way to do it, Mr. Customer, if I understood you correctly, your concern is this. Is that right? Next time, that's it. Or next time, that's not what I meant. Either way, it's a win. I'm getting clarification. The next thing I have to do is answer that objection logically. And as we give you these scripts, all of these responses do that. Right? If somebody says to you, and our industry teaches us to do this, or historically has taught us, if somebody says to you, hey, what time do you have? You can tell them purple. Go right ahead. The problem is, it makes no sense to the customer, and you lose credibility. If somebody asks me the time, I have to give them a time. We can disagree. My watch could be wrong. Their watch could be wrong. They could be be operating on Pacific time. I'm on Eastern time. Whatever. They could be daylight savings time adjusted. I'm not. I mean, there truly are countless valid reasons for you and I to disagree on something as simple as the time. But the thing that I do in offering you any time is maintain credibility. I've at least endeavored to answer your question. I've put forth a good faith effort. Whereas if I answer with a color, I've just lost all credibility. And the customer, and that's when we lose customers. Not when we can't agree, but when they lose confidence in our ability to serve them effectively and to make good use of their time. People will do business. They will overlook what you perceive to be objections. Right? If we can't come to terms on this particular variable, they will look for other ways to make the deal. They're more compelled today, they're more invested today than they've ever been. We do not lose customers because of an inability to agree to certain deal points. As often as we lose customers because we lose credibility. We lose their confidence in our ability to make good use of their time. So we've got to answer the objection logically, first and foremost, to maintain credibility, even if we're not going to agree on the answer I give. That's fine. It's got to be a credible answer. And then once I do that, I've got to ask their permission to move beyond it. That sounds a little bit like assuming the close. In other words, once I've acknowledged their objection, I've answered it logically. My answer makes sense. It may not be acceptable, but it makes sense. Well, then it's incumbent upon me to ask them to move forward, to take the next step, for a couple of reasons, right? Many of us were taught when you're negotiating, whoever talks next loses, right? Customer objects, you give an answer, and then you shut up. And if you step back from that for just a minute, it's probably the silliest thing we were ever taught, and I myself taught. But because if I'm negotiating with a customer, and he objects, and I answer his objection logically, it's an answer that is hard for him to refute. What's the most comfortable thing for him to say when I shut up? The very most comfortable thing for him to say is, okay, well, yeah, I see your point. I guess I'm going to have to think about it. Okay, maybe I'll have to shop around then. Why would I elicit that response? Whereas if I answer him logically, and then I ask him respectfully to move beyond it, to take the next step with me, he very likely will, because he doesn't have a logical argument to answer with. Right? So what we've got to do is ask permission to move beyond the objection to the next variable in the deal. Right? Once the customer objects, I answer his objection logically, and then I say to him, "Do you want to get started on that customer statement? Right? Could I get the keys to your trade, please?" Implying that we're going to take the next step. And if he picks up a pen or hands me his keys, he just agreed to move past that objection. So that's what we want to do. So, I said before we want to race the price. And as I wind this down, there's really two things I want to leave you with. I want to leave you with a recommendation for how to introduce price in a consistent, reliable, and logical manner. And then I want to give you the scripts when the customer objects anyway. So, you think about this for a second. If a customer comes in, they have two primal fears, the car and the deal. Which are they going to put first? Typically, they'll put the car first, right? Because if they don't like the car, the deal doesn't matter. So, and the customers come down to your store, whatever. So what I would encourage you to do is to literally rehearse how long it takes you and how much ground you will cover walking to say the following. How long it take you and how far will you go while you're saying, "Hey, Mr. Customer, when we get back from the test drive, there's three things I owe you. A vehicle history report, a reconditioning report, and a market analysis. Please don't let me forget to do those things when we get back." And as you're saying that last part, you're opening the door handle. You're raising the handle on the car, and you follow it without a breath by saying, now let's take a look at the car. Right? Mr. Customer, when I get back from the test drive, there's three things I owe you. A vehicle history report, a reconditioning report, and a market analysis. Here's the car, let's take a look. Why? Why is that important? Because I'm going on record. I'm getting out ahead of it. And I'm saying to them, Mr. Customer, because customers, when we get back to the test drive, it's what they're going to do. When we come back to the test drive, the customer is naturally going to ask the question, so what can you do for me? But we're going to come back to the test drive, and hopefully, they're going to say, "Hey, Bob, I really like the car. What can you do for me? What do the numbers look like?" Right? How much is this going to cost me? All being different ways of suggesting we should negotiate the price. So I want to get out ahead of that immediately before the test drive. Now, saying to the customer, when we get back, not only are we going to talk about the price, but we're going to talk about the price in the context of its competition. And we're going to talk about it in the context of what this vehicle is, both in terms of what it was when we got it and what we've done to it since. So I'm not going to just throw a number. I'm going to give you documentation. I'm going to validate the number. And I want to say that as I'm getting to the car. Why? Because the car demands their attention. It allows me to go on record knowing that when I open the car door, no matter how meaningful what I just said is, intuitively they're going to go, okay, well, let me look at the car, and if I like it, then we'll have that conversation. So I don't say it in the showroom, because if I say it in the showroom, hey, when we get back, I'm going to give you these three things, they're going to give it to me now. So I don't want to say that. I want to say it literally as I'm approaching the vehicle, and I don't want any gap there between when I'm done saying it and I'm opening the car door. I want to say, when we get back, I use these three things, A, B, and C. Here's the car. Let's take a look. So that they're compelled to look at the car, and now when we get back to the test drive, when they do the predictable, and they say to me, hey, what's your best price? Or what can you do for me? What do the numbers look like? I can then logically, credibly say to them, oh, great. Thanks for reminding me. Cool inside. Let me get that information I found. Let me get that market analysis I found. Let me validate for you is what I'm saying. Nothing about that response suggests we're going to negotiate. It reveals confidence. And buttressing that confidence is the fact that you brought it up before they did, before you ever went on the test drive. I'm eager to talk about these things because these are advantages that I have. And I recognize it, and you recognize it, or you wouldn't be here. But we need to know that. So we need to literally rehearse saying the following and identifying how long it takes us to say, Mr. Customer, when we get back to the test drive, I owe you these three things: a vehicle history report, a reconditioning report, and a market analysis. Now, think about those three things, because they're not three random things. I want you to recognize that there are three on-point documents. But the customer has two primal fears. Those fears being, I don't want a bad car, and I don't want a bad deal. What does the vehicle history report tell them? It tells them it was a good car, at least when we got it, right? Now, that's all they know. And most of them know that online before they ever contact you. They've looked at the vehicle history report, and they said, yep, that's good enough relative to the price and the mileage and everything else. Right? In the context of this deal, that vehicle history is acceptable, or I would not be talking to you, no matter what it says. Now, what they can't know is that what you've done to the car since you took ownership of it. Now, think about that for a second. Whether you spend $500 or $1,500 or $2,500 or $3,500 on a car, in every instance, are we spending that money to make the car better or worse? We spend the money to make the car better, right? We recondition it. We put tires on it. We replace the timing belt. We replace the windshield. Whatever. We bump out the scratches. But we make the car better, and we spend money to do that. So, if we started with a car that they perceive to be, based on its history, as good enough, we simply made it better. We should share that with the customer. Here's what we've done to improve upon it that you couldn't know about shopping online. And in so doing, remember, you shopped our numbers against the competition in the market. But they didn't know we spent $1,800 on the car making it better. Not only did we make the car better, but we've addressed primal fear number two. We've made the deal better. Because if I replace the timing belt, that's something they're not going to have to do. Hey, I would recommend we replace this at 80,000 miles. The car's got 71, and we just went ahead and did it. That's savings for the customer. The deal just got better. They walked through the door for the deal that they perceive to be the best in the market. You just made it better. So we've got to take the opportunity to share this with customers. It just so happens that it gives us the perfect opportunity to validate, to get out ahead of it. So when we get back, I'm going to give you these three things. And they're three on-point pieces of information that all lend to validation. None of it opens the door to negotiation. But now, having laid that out in front of the customer, falls down their court. And I'm going to say to them, what's the next logical step? Ask permission to move beyond it. Right? So I'm going to ask him, so here you go. Here are these pieces of information. He's looking them over. Can I get the keys to your trade, please? So we get started on that customer statement. would you like me to go look up the in-service date so we know how much warranty is left? But I'm going to invite them to start discussing the next variable. And that's where I'm going to give them a win. So the ball's now in their court. And let's say that they respond by saying something along the lines of, well, that's all well and good, but I'm still expecting some sort of discount. What do you say? Now, you've done everything right, textbook to this point. You've laid the documents out. You've taken a great shot, a great swing at validation. And the customer just dismisses it. That's all well and good, but I'm still expecting a discount. What do you say? If you don't have a response prepared that is logical and well rehearsed, you lose. Let me make it a harder objection to deal with. What if I went through all of that and I say to the customer, can I get the keys to your tray, please? I'm asking permission to move beyond. And he goes, whoa, hold on a second. Let me get this straight. I've got 6 or 7 cars here over the last 10 years for me and my kids and my neighbors. I've brought a lot of business into this store. And you're actually telling me that I'm going to have to pay the same price as anybody else that walks through that door? I get no consideration for being a loyal customer? What do you say, guys? If you don't have a logical response prepared for that customer, I submit to you that all of us would say, yeah, that's a pretty credible argument. Let me see what I can do. Hold on 1 second. Let me go run that by my boss. That's a fair argument. You just lost. We have to have a logical response. And a logical response in my mind for that customer who's saying, look, I'm a loyal customer. A logical, well-rehearsed response might sound something like, this customer, listen, we appreciate your business. We always have. We always will. But I ask you to recognize something. You're a sharp guy. We've earned your business every time you walk through that door. You've never given it to us for free. We have to earn it. We respect that. I'm here to tell you we're going to earn your business again. We're going to earn it right now. May I show you how? If he says yes, then I have the keys to your tray, please. I'm right back there. No, I want some kind of discount. Mr. Customer, the discount is one thing that the industry has changed. I respect the fact that you're not, you don't do this every day, but we can no longer advertise prices that we're able to negotiate. Because if we do, people never come through the door. But that's not to say we're not going to give you a great deal, because we are. There are other ways for me to save you money. May I show you how? Every customer I've ever met, and every customer our dealers have ever met, says yes to that. Why? Because the fundamental truth here is that they already know it's the best value in the market. They already know that, or they wouldn't be talking to you. And what you're saying to them is, hey, not only have you done a great job here, I'm going to show you where we can save you some more money. Every customer says yes to that, without exception. So, what we have for you, and as I told you earlier, we will share with you, we'll send it out to everyone who registered for this webinar, are a list of 8 or 10 of the most common objections, right? We sat down and said, okay, what's the customer likely to say to try and challenge our price, even after we've laid out those 3 documents, and we've asked permission to move beyond? What are they likely to say? Well, I got to talk to my wife, right? Well, other dealers are offering discounts. Why aren't you? Right? We just went through and we offered the list of most common objections and logical responses to them. And now, that may sound obvious, but unless you rehearse them, you don't own them. And nothing drove me crazier, honestly, than desking a deal, having a salesperson who's been in the business for 8, 10, 12 years, who just spent 2 hours with a customer, with a good up, come to the desk and say, yeah, this guy over here says he needs to go talk to his wife. I don't know what I'm going to do with it. Wait, come on, you've been in the business for 10 years. You hear that every week. And you don't have an answer for it that makes sense and is productive and moves us past that objection. How can we call ourselves a professional and not have answers for the most common objections we hear? That's our trade. This is what we do. So all we did was we sat down and looked at the most common objections and authored logical responses to put you back on the path, get you past price, and invite them to take the next step and negotiate the next variable. So if you will rehearse those, I can guarantee you will not only stop discounting, you will close a higher percentage. Right? And that's a pretty powerful guarantee to offer. If you will rehearse and take ownership of the ability to validate, if you treat that like a professional challenge that you've got to overcome in order to earn a professional wage, because I would submit to you that if you don't rehearse these things, if you're not proficient at this, you can't expect a professional wage. What else is our job? It's not overcoming the most common of objections. So, what we're going to do is we will send this out to everyone with logical responses, and I will encourage you to rehearse them. And rehearse them with another coworker, right? Find somebody who will invest, an hour a day with you, and you can do some role playing. The first time it might be a little bit awkward, but it's imperative because I need another human being to tell me when what I'm saying does or doesn't make sense. If the tone that I'm using does or doesn't communicate what I want to communicate. Because if I get the tone wrong, the message has changed. So with that, guys, I want to thank you for your time. I truly hope that's been productive. More importantly, I know that we'll only be productive if you take ownership of it and rehearse it. So should you have any follow-up questions, either alter them now or feel free to contact your performance manager. Each and every one of you have one and should know well who they are. Thank you very much for your time, guys. Have a great day.